right, how's everybody doing? Okay, it's good to see you. Glad that you're here today. And I want to take a second and welcome those of you who are joining us from our campuses and Ada Bible Church online. Thanks for staying connected with us. My name is Aaron. If we haven't met, Student Ministries, pastor here. And this weekend, I get to wrap up this series that we've been in over the last couple months on the book of James called Faith That Works. And so I'm just really looking forward to hanging out with all of you today and opening the scriptures. And as we begin, I want to tell you a story from my childhood, and the title of the story is Aaron and Joel and Their Adventures with BB Guns. Okay, so you might be thinking, what kind of childhood did you have? Well, two things. Number one, I was a kid in the 80s, all right? So back then, we did this thing that I like to call free-range parenting. Do you know what I mean? Those of you who are a little bit older, it's like we ate breakfast, then we got on a bike, and we were just gone, you know? And it's like sometimes you came home for lunch, sometimes you came home for dinner. I don't know what my parents were doing. I'm not sure they knew what I was doing, but I turned out just fine, okay? Second thing is I grew up in Caledonia, and maybe you're from Caledonia, but I lived there before everybody else moved there, you know? Like, there's this neighborhood now, it's called Jasonville Farms. When I was a kid, it was just some guy named Jason and his farm. So here we are, Joel and Aaron. We have our BB guns, we're at Joel's house, and we decide, let's go frog hunting. So we go down to the swamp behind his house, and I couldn't tell you whether we got any frogs or not. But after a while, we decided to head back to the house, and then this idea came into our minds that really demonstrates that little boys shouldn't have BB guns. Because what happened is we decided we were going to start shooting our BB guns at whatever, you know? It's like, oh, fence post, oh, a rock, oh, you know, your landscaping, a road sign, and then, oh, your dad's truck. And so we're doing this, and we walk up to the truck, and I see this itty-bitty hole in the back window, like BB size, for example. And also, just this spider web of cracks. The whole back window is ruined. And it was in that moment that this sinking feeling entered into my guts. And I thought, oh no, this is gonna be very bad for me. And I know that you know that feeling. And maybe it's some funny story from your childhood, and maybe it's something else, but you know that feeling, right? It's like, oh, this is bad. And I want you to remember that feeling, because as we open the book of James today, I believe that some of the people who originally heard this letter being read had that, oh no, this is gonna be really bad moment. But before I share with you what those words were that caused that moment, I just know that some of us, first time here at Ada Bible Church, maybe it's been a few weeks or months, and so let's just kind of get up to speed on what's going on here with this book of James. So first thing I want to show you is a table of contents. So this letter that we have, that we often call the book of James, it comes to us in the second half of our Bible, the New Testament. So you have Old Testament, which is about the people of God, Israel. New Testament, which is about Jesus, his disciples, and the beginnings of this movement that we call the church. And so James happens here near the tail end of the New Testament. Second image for you here is a map. Jerusalem is where this guy James was a leader and a pastor, and this is where the Jesus movement really began. And so he was there from the very beginning at the launching of the church, but then something happened. There was a persecution that broke out in Jerusalem against the Christians, and many of them fled. They left the city, they ended up in different towns and villages in the surrounding area. Now, something that was happening that's important to our setting for the story today is that in this countryside, in this area around Jerusalem, there were very wealthy landowners. There are these people that had huge farms. And as they saw these displaced people from Jerusalem coming into their areas, they thought, oh, here comes an opportunity. Because these people are desperate. I mean, they're on the run. They have left their families, their businesses, their homes, their neighborhoods, and these people are desperate. And I bet they'll work for anything. In other words, they'll work for nothing. And so imagine yourself in one of these churches, and don't think like a church building, but like somebody's courtyard or a living room. And in that space is a group of people. Some of them are displaced people from Jerusalem. Some of them are wealthy landowners from this region, and some of them are just regular people from the village or town or whatever. And here comes a messenger, and he has a letter from James. And it's like, oh yeah, Pastor James, we remember this guy. And so they read this letter. And so you would hear all the things that we've been studying in this series. And then we come to this verse right here. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. And if you're one of those wealthy landowners sitting in that circle or sitting in that group of people, it's like that sinking feeling that we were talking about, that, oh, this is bad. Because apparently James has heard about what's going on, about how they have taken advantage of these displaced people and how they're paying them basically nothing in order to get an advantage in their business. And James is not happy about it. Now, you might be thinking, interesting story, and that, obviously a very bad thing to do. What does this have to do with us a couple thousand years later? Well, here's the thing. What we're going to learn from James' writing today is simply this. There is a way of handling our resources, and by that I mean our money, our stuff, our things, possessions. There's a way of handling our resources that invites blessing. It invites God's blessing into our life and enables us to bless other people as well. But at the same time, there is a way of handling our resources that invites misery. And not only for ourselves, but invites misery into the experience of the people that live around us. And that is what James is trying to tell these wealthy people, but I think it applies to us as well. We can invite blessing or we can invite misery. And I just think this is a crucial, important conversation for us today because some of us know exactly what that misery feels like. We have been there. It's like we have been in that place under suffocating debt, and it's like, are we ever going to get out of this mess? Or maybe you grew up in a family where your parents made some very poor financial decisions that brought incredible tension into your family. And some of us are still dealing with that tension and stress. And some of us, let's be honest, we are in that place of misery right now. It's like, are we ever going to get back on our feet again? And our marriage, is it going to survive this financial stress that we are in right now? Some of us know what that misery feels like, and we know it all too well. But on the other hand, some of us, probably many of us, have experienced what it's like to feel God's blessing and to be able to bless other people through the resources that God has placed in our hands. It's such a feeling of joy. And so my hope and my prayer for us today is that if we're in a place where we're experiencing that misery, or maybe we're even in a place where we don't even know it, but we're headed toward that misery, that maybe we could be open, that we would have open minds, open hearts to what God wants to say to us, that we could be redirected, challenged, and encouraged. And if you find yourself in that place, it's just like, man, this is a terrible space. I pray that you find hope in the words of James, and maybe the first 1 or 2 steps out of that place. So for our conversation today, I just want to give you a structure of 4 practices that invite blessing into our lives and help avoid misery. So you might be thinking, okay, what exactly were these wealthy landowners doing that was inviting misery into their life? What exactly were they doing? Well, James writes to us and he says this, your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. And gold and silver, they're corroded. Okay, what is going on here? 3 things. Your wealth has rotted. I think the idea here is these are wealthy landowners. Their entire income is based on these farms. And James is saying, look, it's all about your grain. Listen, your grain is rotted. It's falling apart. Moths have eaten your clothes. In case you were wondering, this is actually a thing. Moths do eat, well, actually, it's not the moths, it's the larvae of the moths. So if you find this kind of gross, relax. It's just the worms that come from the moths that eat the clothes. So if you have this in your closet, no worries, okay? But these rich people, they have fancy clothes because they're wealthy. And James says, look, they're being eaten up. And your gold and silver, all this money that you're accumulating, it's corroding, it's rusting away. So what is James saying here? I think what he's saying is simply this. This stuff that you believe is so valuable, This stuff, this money and these things that your entire life is running after this stuff, it's not as valuable as you think it is. It's not as valuable as you think it is because it's vulnerable, it's temporary, doesn't last forever. This stuff that you believe, oh, it's so valuable, so important, it's not that valuable. That's what James is saying. And we know this to be true, right? It's like, you know that if you buy that brand new car, the moment that you drive it off the lot, it loses like what, 25% of its value. I mean, this is just how it works. And that pair of jeans, it's like, oh, I just really want that pair of jeans. You know that next summer, I mean, so far out of style, you won't even dare wear them, right? Like, that stuff that you think is so valuable, it's not as valuable as you think it is. Okay, James, we get it. But he says, listen, it's actually worse than that. He says their corrosion, and he's talking about the money, the gold and silver, how it's corroding. Their corrosion, it's gonna testify against you, and this is gross, and eat your flesh like fire. Wow, okay. Colorful language from James here. What is he saying? I think what he's saying is, look, you talk about corrosion, like eating your flesh. I think he's talking about like burning, like getting burnt. And I think what's happening here is he's saying, look, when you begin to think that money and stuff, these things that you think are so valuable, when you begin to think or you find yourself believing that they are gonna fill up that emptiness that you feel, that they're gonna bring you that meaning and significance and purpose that you're longing for, he's like, that stuff could burn you. You could really get burnt when you find yourself thinking that. And so this brings us to our first practice that we find in the book of James. It's to practice caution. When you find yourself believing that things and money and accomplishment are gonna bring that purpose and meaning and significance that you long for, it's like, you could get burnt here. And so I brought an image that I thought would help with this. Found it on the side of the road, figured they probably didn't need it. I'm kidding, somebody made this for us. I would not do that. But I just want us to take a second and think about this, because I think we all fall into this trap, this line of thinking. We find ourselves believing, when I get that promotion, or when I get that new job, man, that's gonna fix everything. Like that'll solve all the problems. And I think James would say, you could get burnt with that line of thinking. You could really get hurt here, so practice caution. When we think like, when I'm able to get the savings account like up to, whatever that amount is, and we'd just be able to, everything is gonna be fine now. Look, savings accounts are good and important, but when we find ourselves believing that that's it, man, you could get burnt. Practice caution. Or here's one that I fall into. See, I have a big family, we got 5 kids, and I find myself thinking, man, if we could just get a bigger house, with like more bedrooms, bigger basement, like huge backyard, more places for me to hide from my kids when they're out of control, that would fix everything. And there are times when I really think that, and it's like James would pull me aside and just say, man, you could get burnt with that line of thinking. You could really get disappointed here, so practice caution. You see, there are certain practices that invite blessing into our lives, and there are others that invite misery. And I just believe that when we put all the weight on those things and our money, that this is gonna solve everything, man, that is a pathway to misery. And sometimes it takes people from Hollywood to help us to realize that. Now, here's a guy, you might recognize him, Jim Carrey, pretty funny guy. He said something so interesting on this topic. He said these words, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything that they ever dreamed so they can see that it's not the answer. I mean, here's a guy who has everything that he could ever want. He's got so much money, he can do anything that he wants, and he says, it's not the answer. And we see this in the newspaper all the time, right? There are certain practices that invite blessing and others that invite misery. And James is saying, look, practice caution. That's a way to invite blessing into your life. Now, you might be thinking, this is great because I am so cautious. I mean, I barely spend money on anything. It's like shop at Aldi, coupons, Netflix only. Like we cut the cable cord a long time ago. Like I am very cautious. Okay, that's great. That's great. But James has more to say about this subject. He says to these wealthy landowners, look, you have hoarded wealth in the last days. Okay, how have they hoarded wealth? Well, he continues, he says, look, And it's almost like he's pointing at the problem. Look, the wages that you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. And you read this mowed, you might be thinking like, pushing the lawnmower, but it's actually like this. Ancient times, you have these crops and you have all these workers by hands all day in the sun, back-breaking work. And these wealthy landowners, they have seen an opportunity, they've taken it, they're barely paying these people. And James says, look, the wages that you have failed to pay, they're crying out. You have done something wrong here. And James, maybe these people listening to this letter, I just imagine these wealthy business guys are like, okay, James, here's the thing. Appreciate the letter. You're a pastor. We're business guys. Like, you don't understand our world clearly, because this is how business works, right? In order to get ahead, in order to make money, you have to take advantage of opportunities, and labor is one of the huge variables in business. Like, I know you're upset, but it's business. And I think James would say, okay, it's business, but it's something else too. It's integrity. There is an issue of integrity here. And so second practice that I see in James' writings is just practice integrity. To practice integrity in our financial lives is to invite blessing, but to act without integrity is to invite misery. Now, in the context of money and stuff and business and all of that, what is exactly integrity? What does it look like? And I think it's simply this. Integrity is doing what's right. It's doing what you should do all the time. And James is saying, look, you are not doing what's right with these displaced people from Jerusalem, and your actions are crying out against you. And it's worse than that even, because he continues to write, and he says, the cries of the harvesters, the people, they are crying out, and their cries have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. And I just wonder, what's in these cries? I mean, put yourself in the place of these workers. They're far from home. They've left because of persecution. Their families are behind them. Their homes are behind them. Their successful businesses, probably in some cases, are behind them. And here they are, busting it all day long, harvesting crops for these wealthy people, and they just can't even get ahead. I mean, I just imagine cries of anger. This is not right. Cries of frustration. It's like all day long in the fields, and I can't even provide for my family. And it says these cries have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. He has heard these cries. And I think it's important to keep in mind that James is a Jewish guy. He's writing to Jewish Christians. And all throughout his letter are all these references to this shared history of the Jewish people. And I think his audience would have picked up on this language here and jumped immediately to this story we find in the book of Exodus of God rescuing his people, the Israelites, out of slavery, where God says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out, same exact language, because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. He says, I've seen it, I have heard it, and I am concerned about it. And I just think this is just an important moment. If you find yourself in a place where you are struggling and you are frustrated and perhaps even suffering because of the lack of integrity of someone else, particularly in finances, I just need you to know God knows about that. He's seen what's going on. He hears your prayers, and he is concerned about you. He cares about the suffering that we go through, particularly when it's because of somebody else's lack of integrity or injustice. You see, all through the story of Scripture, God stands with those who are being mistreated, who are suffering because of a lack of integrity, who are suffering because of injustice. He stands with those people. And he stands against those who act without integrity. And so it's just so important that we understand that to act with integrity in our financial lives, that's to invite blessing. To act without integrity in our financial lives, that's to invite misery, and you might even go as far as to say, invite the resistance of God himself. And so just an important question, I think, for us to consider is this. If integrity is doing what's right, is there something that we need to make right? Is there something that we have done wrong that we need to go back and make right? I mean, is there somebody that you owe? A former roommate, a friend of yours maybe that you used to live with that just, you didn't actually pay all the rent. You still owe them. Or somebody that you hired to do a service like paint one of your rooms or remove a dead tree or fix a plumbing issue, and there's still a balance. And it's been a while. Is there somebody that you owe? Your parents, maybe. It's like during a tough season, they jumped in, they helped you out, and you just haven't paid them back because they're your parents, right? It's fine. Is there something you need to make right? Is there somebody that you cheated? That Craigslist sale, it's like, wasn't exactly honest about the state of that item I was selling. Your employer, is there some way that you cheated your employer? Or the government, the IRS, taxes, were you completely honest or did you cheat a little on your tax? Is there something that you need to make right? Because integrity matters to God deeply. And integrity is doing what's right. And I'll just say this, and I think this is important. It's never too late to do what's right. I mean, it's never too late to choose integrity. There might be something that's like 10 years ago, you're like, yeah, I did not handle that the right way. I think it would be so honoring to God to go back into that situation and say, hey, this is awkward, but I just need to be honest. This is what I did. It's never too late to do what's right. So practice integrity. And hopefully you're in a place today where you're saying, I don't think that I have cheated anybody, and I'm pretty sure I don't owe anybody, so I think I'm good. And that may be, but James does have more to say about these practices. He says to these wealthy landowners, look, you have lived on earth in luxury, self-indulgence, and you have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. James is using such colorful and vivid imagery here. And I just, three ideas here. Luxury, self-indulgence, almost this idea of like overindulgence, too much, to the point that you're fattening yourself. It's just very vivid, like you're literally getting bigger here. And it just brings to mind like the holiday season, you know? It's like Thanksgiving, all that turkey, and then the pumpkin pie. And then we get to Christmas, and it's like, oh, here's 1,000,000 cookies, you know? And it's like, well, you should probably have them. Then New Year's, which, all those appetizers and all that food. And you just get to the other side of that, and you're like, time to put on your jeans, and you're like, you can't even, because literally, you fatten yourselves. And I know you know what I'm talking about. You're looking at me like, no, you know what I'm talking about. But I think what James is saying here is like, it's not just with food. I mean, this is your lifestyle, you wealthy landowners. You're overstuffed. You've overstuffed your lives with things, luxury, self-indulgence. You fatten yourselves. And I just get the impression this is how they live. It's always with them more, always more. Now, here's the good news. We here in American culture, this is not an issue for us, right? Like, just not a thing, this temptation to always be going after more and the next thing. And, I just got the new iPhone, but there's a new iPhone, and this one, Siri, not only can you ask Siri to take you to the grocery store, give you directions, but Siri will literally make you dinner. So I gotta have that one now. It's always this more. Does anybody else feel this? Is it just me? Like, there's this temptation, this pressure in our culture. And here's the honest truth. Like, there are so many great things about our country, right? Freedom, I mean, amazing. Democracy, I mean, what a gift, right? Baseball, yes. And then there's this more, always more, the practice of more. And can we just be real? Like, I'm not sure that this is a practice that leads to blessing. In fact, I think you can make a pretty strong argument that more and more, always more, it actually invites misery. And so if you wrote the practice of more in your notes, go ahead and cross that out. That's not the practice. I just do not believe that is what leads to blessing. I think it's something else. What is it? What is the practice here that invites blessing in our lives? And I just think that really it's this. It's the practice of contentment. It's that practice where we say, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy the good things that God has placed in my life. And I just want to be satisfied with how God has already blessed me. And I'm just going to choose to say no to always more and more and more. I just believe that the practice of more does not invite blessing. It's the practice of contentment. And I think that for some of us, maybe this is where we need to zero in today. Because, integrity is really not the thing. And we really don't believe that thing over there is going to fill us up. But we are always tempted to get the next thing and just accumulate more and more. And so what do we do? How do we grow in this area? Because if we're going to try to move toward contentment, we have to understand that our entire culture is moving toward more. And so you're going to bump into people, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to require discipline, focus. It's going to be a challenge. And so what can we do? I have two ideas. Both of them are stolen directly from Jeff Mannion, because that's how I roll. Okay, the first one is this gratitude journal, and I do this on a regular basis. Bob talked about this last week even, but I think it's worth returning to because it really works for me, okay? So the idea is in the morning, as you're journaling your prayers, or maybe this is the only thing that you do in your journal, but just jotting down 3 specific things or experiences or whatever that you're grateful for from the previous day. So let me just give you a little sampling. One would be from last night. I got to go on a date with my wife, which is awesome, so much fun, and it doesn't always happen because we have so many kids. But thanks for great tacos and time with Katie. Thank you for a great bike ride with the whole family where no one melted down. Okay, so this is a really good thing when you have 5 kids. Everybody pedaled the whole time. It was amazing. And then another one is just thanks for family time out on the deck with my kids. I have a great deck. I have wonderful kids. We were out there, we had dinner, and then we played 2 Truths and a Lie, which is really entertaining with 5-year-olds and younger. The stuff they come up with is great. But this discipline of gratitude, and I'm telling you, if you want to move in the direction of contentment and move away from this more, always more, I think this discipline of gratitude on a daily basis, just, okay, yesterday, what can I thank God for? Because it helps you enjoy and appreciate the things that you already have. So that's the first idea. The second idea, this is a little gross, but okay, James gave us this image of fattening yourself, right? Like you're literally overstuffing yourself. And so maybe the idea is we need to trim the fat, right? Gross, I know, but you're probably gonna remember it. What if we just got rid of some stuff? And Jeff gave us this idea a few months ago, and I think it's great, so I'll share it again. What if you walked into your closet or walked into your garage and just took a look around and just thought, okay, if I haven't worn that or if I haven't used that in the last month, maybe it doesn't belong to me. Maybe I need to find its rightful owner because I'm not using it. And so maybe that shirt, it's a great shirt, but I just don't wear it. I bet there's somebody in my life who would really appreciate and love this shirt. Or a set of golf clubs or chainsaw. It's like, man, I bought it. It's really cool. Just have not used it. Find the rightful owner. Find somebody to give that to. An opportunity to invite blessing into your life and bless other people with the stuff that you have. And so the discipline of gratitude, trim the fat. If you're interested in moving toward the practice of contentment, there's 2 ideas for you. Now, this verse that we just looked at, if you're detail-oriented, there is this little phrase that's very strange that I want to return to. James says, you lived on earth in luxury, self-indulgence, fatten yourselves in, and here we go, in the day of slaughter. That's strange, right? And it's, again, there's a lot of Jewish ideas here that would have made sense to the audience, that to us, it's like, that is a very strange way of saying that. So what is going on here? I think what James is saying is, look, over here, the wealthy people, luxury, self-indulgence, fattening yourselves. Over here, these displaced people, they are experiencing the day of slaughter, which is a very graphic way of saying they are suffering, they are hurting, and in some cases, I think they're even dying. Because what's going on here is this region of the world is right on the heels of a very bad famine. There's just not much to go around. And you add on top of that, they're displaced from their homes, and they're working for basically nothing. They are struggling. And so over here, it's like you got way more than you need, and over here, you don't have enough. And then James says, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one, which is a way of saying the Christians, I think. They were not opposing you. They didn't do anything to you. And you have condemned them, and you have murdered them. Now, I think there's a little bit of hyperbole going on here because I don't think that these wealthy landowners are actually killing, like actively killing these people. But James is putting some responsibility on them. He's like, you have more than you need. They don't have enough. And you looked at this and said, here's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to get more. And James says that was wrong. And you should have seen this as an opportunity for something else. And this opportunity is our fourth practice. It's the practice of compassion. James says, you looked at it and you saw an opportunity for advantage. I can get more here. And what you should have done is seen this as an opportunity to show compassion. All these resources that God has placed under your care, you could have shared. You could have used them to help. You should have showed compassion. And compassion is something that is so important to God, so close to his heart. In fact, when Jesus was on the earth, he told this parable of what the people of God, the Jesus followers, what they're like, what their character is like. And so he told this parable of a king who separates his people into two groups. Over here, he calls them the sheep. Over here, he calls them the goats. And maybe this is familiar to you, maybe not. But he says to the sheep, look, you're going to inherit my kingdom, and you're going to experience, all the joys that come with spending forever with me. And then he describes what their character is like, kind of like the reason. He says, because when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. And when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was sick, you took care of me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I didn't have any clothes, you gave me clothes to wear. And in this story that Jesus is telling, the people that he's calling the sheep, they're like, time out. When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or in prison or any of these things? Like, we never saw you like that. And Jesus, his own words, he says, the king, which I think this is Jesus, will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, like the least of these, the poor, those who were in a desperate situation, whatever you did for them, you did it for me. And it's like Jesus is saying, when you showed compassion to these people who were suffering and who were desperate and who didn't have what they needed, it's like you did that to me. When you loved them, you loved me. He makes this connection between loving those who don't have enough and actually loving God. This is one of the ways that you can love God. He cares so deeply about compassion. And so just a question for us to consider today, is there someone in your life who is struggling, who has need, who finds themselves in a desperate situation where God might be saying, look, I've given you a lot of resources and I've placed them under your care. This is an opportunity to show compassion and to share. Is there somebody in your life that you could show compassion to this week? Friend, coworker, family member? My guess is God might just be revealing somebody to you right now. And this exact type of scenario happened to a group of people from Ada Bible Church last week, because there were a group of high school students from our Lifeline ministry who were in the Dominican Republic, 17, 18-year-old kids, who, as part of their trip, they were interacting with people from this village. They were serving alongside this church, and they met this guy named Franklin. And Franklin is a young man, and he has a brain tumor. And it's a very serious situation. He can't work anymore. In fact, his wife left him because he can't provide for his family anymore. And so these students and the leaders that were with them, they're listening to this story, and they're feeling this compassion for this man. And they went back to the church that they were staying in, circled up, and just said, what can we do? What can we do about this? And what they ended up doing is taking the resources that they had with them, pooling them together, and they raised enough money, like $650, to pay for this guy's surgery. Just amazing story of compassion of our students here at Ada Bible Church. Because they saw an opportunity for compassion, to love somebody, and they took advantage of it. And so again, I just ask, is there somebody in your life that God is asking you to show compassion to? And maybe you're thinking like, that is a cool story, and yeah, I can think of somebody, but I mean, what good is just one person showing compassion to another person? Like what good can that really do when you think about like all the problems and issues going on in the world? This is a great question. And to answer that question and to wrap up our time today, I want to introduce you to somebody. His name is Emperor Julian, just a great looking dude. This is an emperor of the Roman Empire about 360 AD. And he has this letter that he wrote that we have recorded to a high priest in the province of Galatia, which probably giving you too much info, but Roman province, modern day Turkey. He's writing this letter to this high priest. And when you hear high priest, don't think like Christian or Catholic. Like this is the Roman religion, like all these Roman gods. And so Julian, he follows the Roman gods. He's writing to a priest of the Roman gods, and he's upset. He's mad because his religion is on the decline. And this Christianity faith is really on the rise. And he's mad about it, and he's trying to change this. And so he says to this guy, look, we need to do things like the Christians are doing it. So I'm sending you all kinds of money and resources, and I want you to set up this system where you're taking care of the poor, because that will fix things. And then here's an exact quote from the letter that he wrote. He says, "For it is disgraceful that when no Jew," and he describes the Christians as Jews and Galileans. Another part of the letter, he calls them atheists. I kind of just find that entertaining. But he doesn't really understand the Christian faith, so he's referring to them like where they came from the Jewish people and the region of Galilee. So no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, it's not just they're taking care of the Christian poor, but ours as well. All men see that our people lack aid from us. He's like, look, this is what the Christians are doing. They're taking care of the poor, all the poor who are Christians, and they're taking care of all of our poor. And because of this, everybody's becoming a Christian. He's like, this has to stop. We have to start taking care of our poor. And so the Christians of that era were very good at showing compassion. Now, something interesting about this guy, Julian, he was, as I understand my history, the last Roman emperor who followed the Roman gods. Because the next Roman emperor was trying to figure out, how do I unite this empire that's been fragmented by civil war? I mean, what do I do? Oh, I know. I'll make Christianity the official religion because everybody's a Christian, so this will work. You see, this is how much the Christian faith, these early Christians, had transformed this Roman empire in an empire where it was illegal to be a Christian through their acts of compassion. And so you ask, like, okay, how much can one story, one individual, how much difference can that make? Well, when you take the collective, it can make a huge impact. And so I just wonder, what if it wasn't just one person here and one person there and one person over here, but Ada Bible Church, the people of Ada Bible Church, acting with compassion towards people with needs? I mean, what would happen? What might God be pleased to do in our community? And this, as we wrap up this series, I just realized that these people, these early Christians, they had the book of James. I mean, they heard this read, they had copies of it, they distributed it to all the churches, and they heard these words of James. And they started to put them into practice. I mean, some of the lessons that we've learned in this series, they put into practice this idea of being compassionate. They put into practice some of the things that we learned from Bob last week about suffering well. And they put into practice, look, authentic faith asks us to trust God with everything. And from the book of James, they learned, listen, our words matter. And so they started to put that into practice. And I think what they discovered is that this is a faith that really works. It's a faith that really works, and it started to change their lives and transform their families, and it turns their communities upside down, and then this empire became Christian. Book of James, the scriptures had that kind of power, and I just wonder what would happen if we, moving forward, just started to put into practice these teachings that we've been learning from James. I mean, what might God be pleased to do in our lives, in our families, in our city? Because this is a faith that really works. And so as we wrap up our time, I would just love to pray for you. And then our room hosts and campus pastors are going to come up and share a couple words and dismiss us. So I'd love to just pray for you. God, thanks for today, for your scriptures, for the book of James that we've spent the last couple months in. God, I just recognize that you have been moving in us as individuals and in us as a church. And God, it's so fascinating to think about what you did in the early church. But God, we just recognize that it's the same scriptures, same Holy Spirit, same Jesus. God, I just ask that you would move in us and through us. God, we want to see people come to Jesus all over our city. God, please move in our church and in our lives. God, thank you for who you are. We just love you, and we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.